Delegation as default. The quiet loss of audit skill. Automation is often discussed as a matter of convenience. Fewer steps, less friction, more output per unit of effort. Delegation is often discussed as a matter of maturity, knowing what not to do, conserving attention, assigning work to the tool or the specialist. Those stories are not false, they are incomplete. The real stakes are not drama, they are structure. When delegation becomes the default path, a system quietly rearranges what is practiced, what is remembered, and what is still legible to the people inside it. Skills do not vanish in a single moment, they fade through disuse. And disuse is not merely personal. It becomes a feedback loop when a whole environment starts treating direct engagement as optional. The question then is not whether automation is good or bad. It is, what becomes unpracticed, and therefore unthinkable, when the first move is always to hand the task away, whether to software, to process, to a vendor, or to an internal function that absorbs responsibility on behalf of everyone else. Let us examine the structure. When delegation becomes the default, the primary skill that disappears is the ability to audit reality, because practice is replaced by proxies, and the capacity to notice, verify, and judge erodes faster than the benefits are counted. This sermon will make a limited claim. It will describe how dependency loops form when automation and delegation reduce practice, and how those loops reduce competence and oversight over time. It will not claim that automation is inherently corrosive or that direct manual work is morally superior. It will not offer a program, a list of habits, or a call to action. The aim is not to recruit resistance, but to clarify trade-offs, what the system rewards, what it constrains, and what failure modes it quietly incubates when the default path is handed off. We need clear terms, because confusion here is costly. First term, automation. In plain language, automation is any mechanism that converts a repeated judgment or action into a repeatable process. Sometimes it is a script, sometimes it is a workflow, sometimes it is a model that produces an output that people accept. The defining feature is not that it is advanced, but that it shifts work from attention to machinery. A simple example, a form that automatically validates a date format. A more complex example, a system that sorts applications and forwards only a subset for review. Automation reduces the need for ongoing human effort, but it also reduces ongoing human contact with the underlying task. Second term, delegation. Delegation is the decision to place responsibility for a task outside the self, to another person, team, or tool. Delegation can be explicit, you handle this, or implicit, the system will handle this, I will accept its output. Automation is a form of delegation when it replaces direct engagement with a mechanism. The important detail is that delegation is not only a transfer of labor, it is a transfer of learning opportunities. Third term, competence. Competence is not talent, it is reliable performance under variation. A competent person can handle cases that do not look exactly like the training examples, because competence includes internal models, a sense of what matters, what can break, and what signals are meaningful. Competence depends on practice, and practice depends on exposure to the messy parts of reality, not only to clean, standardized inputs. Fourth term, audit capacity. Audit capacity is the ability to verify that an output matches reality and the intended constraints. It is not the same as monitoring a dashboard. A dashboard is a measurement. An audit is a check against the world. Audit capacity requires 3 sub-skills. 1. Legibility, knowing what you are looking at and what it depends on. 2. Skepticism, the habit of asking what could be wrong and what evidence would show it. 3. Recourse, a way to intervene when the output is wrong. A plain example, if an automated system produces a number, audit capacity means you can explain where the number comes from, what assumptions produce it, and how you would detect when those assumptions fail. We also need one distinction that will recur: metric versus meaning. A metric is a measurable proxy. Meaning is the underlying purpose that the metric tries to approximate. Systems run on metrics because metrics are legible. People live with meaning because meaning is what makes trade-offs intelligible. A recurring failure mode in automation is the substitution of metric for meaning. The proxy becomes the target, and the original purpose becomes harder to articulate. Now the assumptions. Assumption 1. Practice is not merely repetition, it is calibration. Humans refine judgment through error, feedback, and correction. Remove the loop, and you remove the calibration. Assumption 2. Automation changes incentive even if intentions stay constant. If a tool makes a path easier, the path becomes the default. Defaults become norms. Norms become expectations. Expectations become hiring criteria, promotion criteria, and time allocation. Assumption 3. Complex systems fail in ways that are rare but consequential. In these cases, the value of audit capacity is not in daily comfort, but in moments when the proxy breaks from reality. Assumption 4. Time and attention are finite. Delegation is attractive because it preserves them, but preserved attention is not automatically invested in understanding. It is often invested in throughput. With these terms and assumptions, the question becomes sharper. If practice produces competence, and competence supports audit capacity, what happens when the default path removes practice from the system? A first answer is obvious. The skill of performing the task manually declines, but that is not the central loss. The central loss is the skill of understanding the task well enough to know whether the delegated output is trustworthy. Manual skill is the visible surface. Audit skill is the structural foundation. The central paradox is this: automation succeeds by removing the need for attention, but safety and meaning depend on attention applied at the right points. Optimization seeks to reduce variance and cost. Reality preserves variance and imposes cost in irregular bursts. Delegation is efficient when the environment is stable, but audit capacity is built by engaging with instability. Consider the basic incentive landscape. When a tool reduces effort, managers see a gain in throughput. When throughput increases, expectations recalibrate. What was once fast becomes normal. The saved time is rarely protected. It is repurposed. The system behaves as designed. It treats time as capacity to be allocated to more output. The first-order effect is productivity. The second-order effect is that the human role shifts from doing to supervising. But supervision is often defined as approving outputs rather than understanding processes. This creates a common pattern. The human becomes a rubber stamp. Not because humans are careless, but because the system rewards speed and penalizes friction. If a person slows down to audit, they become an outlier. Outliers invite explanation. Explanation consumes time. The organization seeking consistency steers away from that friction. Delegation becomes default not through argument, but through repeated reinforcement. Here the proxy problem appears. Automation often provides a confidence score, a status indicator, a green light. These are proxies for correctness. People learn to trust the indicator because it correlates with success in most cases. Trust becomes a habit. Habit becomes identity. This system is reliable. This workflow is proven. Over time, the proxy becomes the reality in day-to-day operations. When something goes wrong, the first question is not what is true, but why did the indicator misbehave? Reality is approached through the tool's categories. The unresolved tension sits here. The more we optimize for speed and standardization, the less we can afford the slowness required to verify meaning. Yet the more we optimize, the more we need verification for the edge cases we no longer understand. Two failure modes illustrate this tension. Individual level failure mode, de-skilling through withdrawal from the work. A person who once performed a task develops a sense of texture. Which inputs are suspicious, which outputs are implausible, which conditions require a different approach. When automation takes over, the person still sees inputs and outputs, but no longer performs the intermediate reasoning. Over months, their internal model decays. They retain the vocabulary but lose the calibration. They can talk about the work but cannot reliably detect subtle errors. This is not laziness, it is the predictable result of reduced practice. A violin left unplayed does not preserve skill by goodwill. Judgment left unexercised does not remain sharp by intention. Competence is maintained by contact with reality, including its exceptions. System-level failure mode, shrinking audit capacity through consolidated expertise. As delegation becomes default, organizations concentrate understanding into fewer people. A platform team, a vendor, a specialist group. This can be rational. Centralization reduces duplication and increases consistency, but it changes the risk profile. When knowledge is concentrated, the organization becomes dependent on a narrow channel for interpretation and repair. A subtle second-order effect follows. Because fewer people understand the system, fewer people can challenge it. Fewer challenges mean fewer discovered flaws. Fewer discovered flaws increase confidence. Increased confidence increases scope. Scope increases complexity. Complexity increases the chance of failures that are hard to diagnose. When the failure arrives, the organization discovers that it has optimized away the distributed ability to notice. Centralization, then, is both efficient and brittle. It reduces cost in normal operation and increases the consequence of abnormal operation. Now consider the paradox of responsibility. Delegation is often justified as accountability. Assign the task to the unit that owns it. Yet automation can make accountability ambiguous. When an automated output is wrong, the human operator may say, "The system said so." The system owner may say, "The input was bad." The data steward may say, "The definition is correct." Each role has a plausible defense because the system is layered. This is another proxy problem. Responsibility becomes a document, not a practice. Roles are assigned, but audit capacity is not distributed. The organization has accountability on paper, but not competence in the field. A further tension: standardization versus local knowledge. Automation prefers clean categories and consistent inputs. Local reality is irregular. People who do hands-on work develop heuristics that do not fit neatly into categories. When the system is automated, those heuristics often cannot be expressed. They become tribal knowledge, then unscalable, then non-compliant. The system rewards what can be encoded. The work that cannot be encoded is discounted. This produces a quiet inversion. The map becomes authoritative over the territory. The automated categories become the official reality. People learn to adapt reality to the form, not the form to reality. And yet the attraction remains. Delegation removes burden. Burden removal is real value. The paradox is not that automation helps, it does. The paradox is that the kind of help it offers can reduce the system's ability to recognize when help is no longer helping. Optimization without reflection narrows the range of what is considered. Speed is measured. Safety is often inferred. Meaning is rarely measured at all. Therefore, the system tends to improve speed, assume safety, and neglect meaning. This is not a condemnation. It is an observation about incentives and measurement. What can be counted gains authority. What must be judged loses it. To ask what skills disappear is to ask what forms of judgment are being replaced by what forms of measurement. Often the disappearing skill is not how to do the task. It is how to tell whether the task has been done in a way that still serves its purpose. Second-order effects are the consequences that persist because they are stabilized by feedback loops. They do not require malice. They require only that people respond rationally to constraints. First consequence: the erosion of diagnostic imagination. When a system works most of the time, people stop imagining how it could fail. Their mental model becomes input goes in, output comes out. The intermediate steps become opaque, even if they are technically documented. Documentation is not the same as familiarity. Familiarity is built from repeated engagement, including the experience of error. As diagnostic imagination erodes, incidents become harder to interpret. When a surprising outcome appears, people reach for surface explanations. The system is down, the data is delayed, the user made a mistake. Sometimes those are true, but when the failure is structural, misspecified constraints, shifting distributions, silent edge cases, surface explanations delay learning. This persists because the system rewards normal operation, not imagination. Imagination is unmeasured work. Second consequence: a shrinking vocabulary for quality. Quality is often multidimensional. Correctness, fairness, robustness, interpretability, timeliness, appropriateness to context. Automation pressures quality into a few metrics: accuracy, latency, cost. These are not bad metrics, they are incomplete. When the vocabulary shrinks, debate shrinks. People can no longer articulate what feels wrong because the system does not provide terms that carry authority. If a concern cannot be expressed in the system's language, it becomes anecdotal. If it is anecdotal, it is deprioritized. If it is deprioritized, it is not addressed. The system trains people to speak only in proxies. Third consequence: fragility through over-reliance on rare expertise. As audit capacity concentrates, the system becomes dependent on a small number of people who can interpret it. These people become a bottleneck. Bottlenecks become queues. Queues create pressure to simplify explanations and standardize responses. Standardization reduces nuance. Reduced nuance increases the likelihood of misapplied fixes. This is a system-level failure mode that persists because it looks like efficiency. Fewer experts, more leverage. But leverage is a trade-off. It amplifies both capability and constraint. Fourth consequence, the moralization of throughput. When throughput is the most visible signal, speed becomes equated with competence, slowness becomes equated with deficiency. The person who pauses to verify is seen as risk-averse or unproductive. The person who delegates quickly is seen as strategic. Over time, the culture learns the wrong lesson, that responsibility means moving quickly, not seeing clearly. This is not a moral failing. It is an incentive alignment problem. If the system praises those who produce outputs, it will produce output producers. Fifth consequence, diminished recourse when automation is wrong. Recourse is the ability to intervene, to override, to correct, to repair, to appeal. Automation can reduce recourse by making the process less interpretable and the decision more final. In a well-designed system, automation includes pathways for contesting outputs and improving the model. In a poorly designed system, the automation is treated as authoritative because it is consistent. Consistency is a seductive proxy for correctness. When recourse diminishes, users learn helplessness not as an emotion, but as a strategy. They stop trying to challenge outputs because the cost is high and the success rate is low. The system then receives fewer counterexamples. Fewer counterexamples mean fewer corrections. The system appears stable while drifting away from reality. Sixth consequence, drift in meaning. Purpose is often negotiated through practice. When people do the work, they encounter boundary cases that force questions. What are we really trying to accomplish here? Those questions renew meaning. When work is delegated, boundary cases are handled by exception tickets, not by shared reflection. Meaning becomes implicit. Implicit meaning becomes fragile. Fragile meaning becomes vulnerable to proxy capture. This is how organizations become efficient at producing outputs that no longer serve their original intent. There is no single betrayal. There is only a gradual substitution. What is easy to measure becomes what is valued. Why do these effects persist? Because the reinforcing signals are immediate and the costs are delayed. Automation yields immediate gains, time saved, errors reduced in common cases, standardized outputs. The costs appear later, when something unusual happens, when the environment changes, when a dependency fails, when a previously minor edge case becomes common. Humans discount delayed costs. Organizations which often budget and plan in short cycles discount them even more. Also because responsibility is diffuse. No one person sees the full picture. Each person sees their local constraints, deadlines, service levels, approvals, performance measures. Each person delegates because delegation is the rational response to overload. The dependency loop forms without any person intending it. Less practice leads to less competence. Less competence increases reliance on delegation. More delegation reduces the occasions to rebuild competence. And as competence declines, audit capacity declines. At that point, the system's relationship to reality becomes mediated. People interact with outputs more than with the underlying domain. The system is fast, and it is often correct, but it becomes less accountable to the world it claims to represent. This is not a prophecy of collapse. It is a description of a trade-off that systems often hide. You can purchase speed by spending expertise, but expertise is not an infinite resource. When spent without replenishment, it becomes scarcity. Constraints are not failures. They are the shape of the problem. The question remains, what skills disappear when delegation becomes the default path? One answer is mechanical, the ability to perform the delegated tasks. But that answer is shallow. A deeper answer concerns the capacity to relate to reality without intermediaries. When a person repeatedly delegates, they may lose the skill of forming first principles expectations. What should this look like? The skill of noticing anomalies without being prompted by alerts. The skill of interrogating a proxy. What does this metric omit? The skill of bearing responsibility without a system to blame. Yet, there is an honest tension. Modern life is too complex to refuse delegation. Delegation is not optional. It is how complexity is managed. The unresolved problem is not delegation itself, but delegation as default without preserved audit capacity. If the delegated mechanism is always right, audit capacity looks like waste. If the mechanism is sometimes wrong, audit capacity looks like prudence. Because the wrongness is often rare, the system naturally comes to treat auditing as inefficiency. Efficiency reveals values, what is defended and what is surrendered. Another tension, people often delegate in order to free attention for higher order work. But higher order work depends on grounded understanding. When grounding is lost, higher order work becomes management of symbols, coordinating outputs without touching the reality those outputs refer to. This is a subtle form of dependency. The person depends on the system's categories to think. When the categories fit, thinking feels smooth. When the categories do not fit, thinking stalls. What is being lost then is not merely a set of procedures. It is epistemic independence, the ability to know, in a limited but reliable way, what is true without leaning entirely on a delegated apparatus. But notice the constraint. Audit capacity itself is a resource that requires time, training, and exposure. It cannot be maintained purely as an abstract commitment. It must be practiced. Practice requires allowance for slowness. Slowness conflicts with throughput. Throughput is rewarded, so the question cannot be resolved by preference alone. It is structural. A system that makes delegation the default will tend to move expertise upward and inward, away from the edges where reality is messiest. Replace judgment with measurement because measurement scales. Reduce opportunities for novices to learn because the work is hidden behind interfaces. Produce confident outputs that mask the uncertainty they compress. And still, such a system may produce real value. Fewer routine mistakes, more consistent service, lower cost, broader access. The tension is not that the value is fake. The tension is that the value is purchased with a currency that is rarely accounted for. The capability to detect when the system's outputs have slipped away from the world. There is no neat boundary where delegation becomes too much, because the boundary depends on context, the cost of error, the rate of change in the environment, the availability of recourse, the transparency of the mechanism, the distribution of understanding across the system. What can be held, without closure, is a disciplined awareness. Defaults are not neutral. They are incentives made invisible. If delegation becomes the default, it is worth noticing what is no longer practiced, and therefore what is no longer teachable, not as a call to reverse the trend, but as a recognition of the trade-off. Clarity requires restraint. Restraint in what we automate without understanding. Restraint in what we delegate without preserving the ability to check. A system that delegates by default will eventually lose the skill of knowing whether it is still in contact with reality. Clarity requires restraint.